Look at this pathetic fool. District Attorney Patricia Whitman's voice cut through the packed courtroom like a blade. She pointed directly at the 19-year-old black defendant sitting alone at his table. Your Honor, this boy thinks he can play lawyer. Should we get him some crayons and coloring books instead? The entire gallery erupted in cruel laughter. The judge smirked. Court officers shook their heads in amusement. Someone in the back row actually pulled out their phone to record the entertainment. Marcus Thompson sat perfectly still. His jaw clenched, his fists tightened on the table. But his eyes burned with something they couldn't see. 3 years of 18-hour study days. Every legal precedent memorized. Every constitutional law mastered. They saw a joke. He saw his moment. Have you ever been so completely dismissed that people treated you like you were invisible? What happened in the next 30 minutes would flip their entire world upside down. 6 months earlier, Marcus Thompson sat hunched over a stack of law books in his grandmother's cramped apartment. The kitchen table doubled as his study desk. Water stains marked the ceiling above him. The radiator clanked through another sleepless night. His grandmother, Ethel, shuffled past in her worn slippers, carrying her oxygen tank. At 73, emphysema was winning the battle her stubborn spirit refused to surrender. Baby, you still studying? It's 3 in the morning. Marcus looked up from a highlighted copy of constitutional law. Coffee stains dotted the pages. Sticky notes created a rainbow of legal precedents across every surface. Grandma, if I'm going to be the first in our family to go to law school, I can't afford to miss anything. She squeezed his shoulder with her frail hand. Your mama would be so proud. But baby, they can't see your mind until you show them. Those words would echo in his head 6 months later when everything fell apart. The charges came out of nowhere. Councilman Richard Sterling claimed someone had spray-painted profanities across his pristine white fence and slashed his car tires. The security footage was grainy, but showed a young black male around Marcus's height and build. When police showed up at Marcus's door with a warrant, they found a paint can in his backpack. His fingerprints were all over it. Funny how these kids always leave evidence behind, Detective Morrison muttered, not caring that Marcus could hear every word. The case landed on the desk of District Attorney Patricia Whitman. For 25 years, she'd built her reputation on one simple principle. She didn't lose, especially not to people who looked like Marcus. Whitman was courthouse royalty. Her corner office overlooked the city square. Awards lined her walls. Her conviction rate sat at an intimidating 97%. Local newspapers called her the Iron Lady of Justice. But behind closed doors, her staff whispered different stories. How she rolled her eyes when public defenders requested fair hearings for minority defendants. How she'd been overheard saying that certain people just couldn't help themselves when it came to crime. Marcus's public defender, James Rodriguez, was drowning in cases. 60 active files sat on his desk. He'd been practicing law for 3 years and had never won against Whitman. When he met Marcus at the county jail, Rodriguez came prepared with plea bargain paperwork. Look, kid, I know you say you're innocent, but the evidence is overwhelming. Whitman's offering 2 years with possibility of parole in 18 months. That's generous for a felony vandalism charge. Marcus stared at him through the reinforced glass. What if I told you I didn't do it? Then I'd tell you that's what they all say. Listen, you seem like a smart kid. Don't throw your life away on pride. Take the deal. That night, alone in his cell, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He fired Rodriguez. The next morning, he stood before Judge Harrison and spoke the words that sent shockwaves through the legal community. Your Honor, I wish to represent myself. Judge Harrison, 62 years old and 40 years on the bench, had seen it all. But a teenager with no legal training defending himself against Patricia Whitman. That was courthouse suicide. Son, do you understand what you're asking? Mrs. Whitman is one of the most experienced prosecutors in the state. I understand, Your Honor. Do you have any legal training whatsoever? Marcus straightened his shoulders. I've been studying law for 3 years, sir. The judge's eyebrows raised slightly. Studying how? Online videos? Snickers rippled through the gallery, but Marcus didn't flinch. Constitutional law, criminal procedure, rules of evidence. I've read every major case that applies to my situation. Judge Harrison rubbed his temples. This was going to be a disaster, but the law was clear. Defendants had the right to represent themselves even if it meant watching them walk into a legal meat grinder. Against my better judgment, I'll allow it, but I'm appointing Mr. Rodriguez as your standby counsel. When this goes sideways, you'll need someone to clean up the mess. Word spread through the courthouse like wildfire. The court clerks gossiped. The bailiffs shook their heads. Even the janitors were talking about the kid who thought he could take on Patricia Whitman. By the time the trial date was set, it had become the courthouse's favorite entertainment. Everyone wanted front row seats to watch the lamb get slaughtered. But nobody bothered to ask one simple question. What if the lamb had teeth? The morning of the preliminary hearing, Marcus walked through the courthouse metal detector like he was entering a battlefield. Every face that turned toward him carried the same expression, pity mixed with cruel anticipation. The gallery was packed beyond capacity. Word had spread through social media about the kid who thinks he's a lawyer. People came to witness what they assumed would be a legal massacre. Marcus took his seat at the defendant's table. The chair felt enormous. The table stretched endlessly in front of him. To his right, Patricia Whitman commanded her space like a queen on her throne, surrounded by 3 assistant prosecutors and boxes of evidence. She glanced over at Marcus and didn't bother hiding her smirk. "This should be over quickly, Your Honor," she announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Perhaps we should assign a guardian ad litem?" The defendant appears to be in over his head. Judge Harrison looked down at Marcus with something approaching sympathy. "Mr. Thompson, are you absolutely certain you want to proceed without proper representation?" Before Marcus could answer, Whitman stood again. "Your Honor, if I may. This boy's academic records show he barely graduated high school. He's never held a steady job. His family has a history of legal troubles." She shuffled through her papers with theatrical precision. "I have documentation showing his father served time for theft. His older brother has multiple arrests for drug possession." The gallery murmured. Marcus felt every eye in the room judging not just him, but everyone who shared his blood. "Furthermore," Whitman continued, "the defendant has a juvenile record that includes truancy and disturbing the peace. This pattern of disrespect for authority and property is well established." Marcus started to stand, but Judge Harrison waved him down. "Sit down, son. Mrs. Whitman, please present your evidence." What followed was a systematic destruction of everything Marcus thought he knew about justice. The security footage played on the courtroom's large screen. Grainy and dark, it showed a figure roughly Marcus's height and build, spray painting obscenities across Councilman Sterling's fence. The timestamp read 11:47 p.m. on the night in question. "The defendant had motive," Whitman declared, clicking to her next slide. Mr. Thompson was present at a city council meeting 2 weeks prior, where he publicly criticized Councilman Sterling's proposed budget cuts to community programs. The footage of that council meeting played next. Marcus watched himself at the podium, passionate but respectful, arguing for funding that would help kids like him stay in school instead of ending up on street corners. In Whitman's hands, his civic engagement became evidence of criminal intent. "The defendant's fingerprints were found on the paint can discovered in his backpack during the arrest," she continued. "The paint matches exactly with the vandalism. Chemical analysis confirms it." Marcus's heart sank. He'd never seen that paint can before in his life, but there were his fingerprints, clear as day on the lab report. "Additionally, we have eyewitness testimony." Whitman called her first witness. Mrs. Patterson, an elderly white woman who lived across from Councilman Sterling, took the stand. She wore a floral dress and spoke in the shaky voice of someone who'd seen too much trouble in her neighborhood. "I was letting my cat out around midnight," she testified. "I saw a young black man running away from the Sterling property. He was wearing a dark hoodie, just like the defendant wore when he was arrested." Marcus owned 12 hoodies. Half the young men in his neighborhood owned dark hoodies. But the way Mrs. Patterson looked directly at him when she said it made him seem guilty of something just by existing. "Did you get a clear look at his face?" Whitman asked. "Well, no. It was dark, and he was running. But I know what I saw." The prosecution's case built like an avalanche. Each piece of evidence seemed designed to bury Marcus deeper. The paint can, the fingerprints, the grainy video, the witness who saw someone who looked like him. But it was the character assassination that cut deepest. Whitman introduced Marcus's juvenile file with the ceremony of a prosecutor unveiling a smoking gun. The truancy charges from when he'd skipped school to take care of his sick grandmother. The disturbing the peace citation from when he'd argued too loudly with a store clerk who'd accused him of shoplifting. "This young man has shown a pattern of defiance toward authority and disrespect for other people's property," Whitman declared. "The evidence shows he simply escalated that pattern." Marcus watched his life get dissected and reassembled into the story of a criminal. Every mistake, every moment of adolescent rebellion, every time the system had already failed him became proof that he deserved to fail again. During the lunch recess, Marcus sat alone on a courthouse bench. His phone buzzed with a text from Harvard Law School. "Due to pending criminal charges, we are suspending your admission and scholarship pending resolution of your case. 3 years of perfect grades, countless hours of studying, sacrificing every social moment of his teenage years, gone with one email." His grandmother's medical bills sat unpaid on his kitchen table at home. The eviction notice would arrive next week. His part-time job at the community center had already fired him to maintain their reputation. But the real punishment wasn't financial. It was social. Walking back into the courthouse, Marcus passed a group of his former high school classmates. They'd come to watch the show. "Yo, Marcus! Heard you trying to be a lawyer now," one shouted. "What's next? You gonna cure cancer?" Their laughter followed him down the hallway like a pack of hyenas. In the bathroom, he overheard 2 court officers talking. "Kid's got some nerve, I'll give him that. Nerve or stupidity. Whitman's gonna eat him alive. $20 says he breaks down crying before she's done with him. You're on. I give him 5 minutes." Marcus stared at himself in the cracked mirror. Dark circles under his eyes from weeks of sleepless nights. His one good suit, pressed but clearly second-hand. His hands, which had memorized every page of constitutional law, trembling with exhaustion and fear. For the first time since this nightmare began, doubt crept in. Maybe everyone was right. Maybe he was just a kid playing dress-up in a grown man's world. Maybe he should have taken that plea bargain and accepted his fate. His grandmother's voice echoed in his memory. "Baby, they can't see your mind until you show them." But what if his mind wasn't enough? What if 3 years of studying couldn't overcome 20 years of a system designed to crush people who looked like him? The afternoon session was about to begin. Patricia Whitman was waiting with more evidence, more character assassination, more reasons why Marcus Thompson was exactly the kind of person who would spray paint a councilman's fence. Marcus took a deep breath and walked back into that courtroom, carrying the weight of his family's future, his community's hopes, and his own dreams on his 19-year-old shoulders. He had no idea that the next few hours would change everything. That night, Marcus sat in his holding cell staring at the concrete walls. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead like an angry wasp. His cellmate, a man named Tommy who'd been in and out of the system for 20 years, watched him with curious eyes. "First time?" Tommy asked, his voice gravelly from too many cigarettes. Marcus nodded. "You that kid everyone's talking about? The one trying to be his own lawyer?" "Yeah." Tommy laughed, but it wasn't cruel. Son, you either crazy or got more balls than sense. Maybe both. Marcus pulled his knees to his chest. I don't know what I'm doing, man. They got fingerprints. They got witnesses. They got everything. Let me tell you something, Tommy said, leaning forward. I've been watching lawyers work for 2 decades. Most of them don't give a damn about people like us. They see us coming and they already writing up plea deals before we even sit down. He pointed at Marcus through the bars. But you got something they don't expect. You actually care about what happens to you. And you know what? That's scary to them. Marcus looked up. How's that scary? Because they built this whole system on us not fighting back. On us taking what they give us and saying thank you. When somebody like you stands up and says, no, I'm gonna fight, that breaks their whole game. Tommy lay back on his thin mattress. My grandmother used to tell me something when I was about your age. She'd say, baby, when they underestimate you, that's when you strike. Took me 20 years in and out of these cells to understand what she meant. Marcus felt something shift inside his chest. Those were almost the exact same words his own grandmother had said. The next morning, when the transport van brought him back to court, Marcus didn't walk with his head down. He stood straighter. His eyes were different. During the lunch break, instead of sitting alone on that bench feeling sorry for himself, he asked the bailiff if he could access the law library. You serious, kid? Dead serious. The courthouse law library was a forgotten room in the basement. Dusty books lined every wall from floor to ceiling. Most lawyers used computers now, but Marcus had always learned better from actual books. He could touch the pages, make notes in margins, cross-reference faster than any search engine. He pulled case files on similar vandalism charges. He studied every precedent where fingerprint evidence had been challenged. He researched timeline discrepancies in security footage. But most importantly, he looked up everything he could find on insurance fraud. Because something about this whole case stunk. Why would Councilman Sterling, a man worth millions, care so much about some spray paint that he'd push for maximum prosecution? Why was the paint can so conveniently found in Marcus's backpack? And why did the security footage seem so perfectly timed to catch just enough to implicate someone, but not enough to definitively identify them? Marcus spent 4 hours in that library. When he finally emerged, his legal pad was covered with notes, case citations, and a strategy that would either save his life or destroy it completely. That evening, his grandmother visited him at the jail. She looked smaller than ever in the hard plastic chair, her oxygen tank beside her like a mechanical pet. Baby, I've been hearing things. People saying you should just take that deal and come home. Marcus reached across the table and took her weathered hands in his. Grandma, if I take that deal, I'll have a felony record. No law school, no future, no way to help our family or anyone else who gets treated like this. Her eyes filled with tears. But what if you lose? What if they give you more time? Marcus squeezed her hands tighter. You remember what you always told me? About them not being able to see my mind until I show them? She nodded. Well, Grandma, it's time for me to show them. He spent that night writing, not legal briefs or case citations, but a letter to his future self, a reminder of why he was fighting and what victory would mean. If you're reading this, he wrote, it means you either won or you're in prison with more time to think about what went wrong. Either way, remember this. You chose to fight when everyone told you to surrender. You chose to believe in justice when everyone told you it didn't exist for people like us. Whatever happens next, you fought. The next morning brought a surprise visitor. James Rodriguez, the public defender he'd fired, sat across from him in the attorney meeting room. Marcus, I want to apologize. I should have believed you when you said you didn't do this. What changed your mind? Rodriguez pulled out a file folder. I kept digging after you fired me. Call it curiosity, call it guilt. But I found some things. He slid a document across the table. It was a financial report on Councilman Sterling. He's broke, Marcus. 3 failed business ventures in the last 2 years. His house is in foreclosure. His cars are being repossessed. Marcus studied the papers. So? So a man desperate for money might be very interested in insurance claims. Property damage claims, specifically. The pieces started clicking together in Marcus's mind like a combination lock finally opening. You think he did this to himself? I think a lot of things don't add up. But I also think you're the only one brave enough to prove it. Rodriguez stood to leave, then turned back. Marcus, I've been practicing law for 3 years. In that time, I've seen the system chew up and spit out dozens of kids who looked just like you. Good kids, smart kids, kids who deserved better. He paused at the door. But I've never seen one of them fight back the way you're fighting. Win or lose, you're already changing something important. That night, Marcus didn't sleep. He sat on his thin mattress reviewing every note, every case citation, every piece of evidence he'd gathered. He practiced his opening statement until the words flowed like water. But more than that, he practiced believing in himself. For 19 years, the world had told him he wasn't smart enough, wasn't worthy enough, wasn't important enough to matter. Tomorrow he was going to prove them all wrong, or die trying. As dawn broke through the small window of his cell, Marcus Thompson made peace with his decision. He was going to walk into that courtroom and show them exactly what they'd been too blind to see. His mind. At 2:17 a.m., Marcus sat in the courthouse law library with a stack of public records spread across the table like puzzle pieces. The security guard had reluctantly let him stay late after he'd explained he was representing himself and needed research time. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Marcus cross-referenced Councilman Sterling's financial documents with his insurance claims history. What he found made his blood run cold. Sterling had filed 3 property insurance claims in the past 18 months. A break-in at his office where nothing was stolen but his computer was damaged. A vandalism incident at his vacation home where someone allegedly threw rocks through windows. And now this. Each claim had been for amounts just under the threshold that would trigger a detailed investigation. Each claim had been paid within 30 days. Marcus pulled up Sterling's business records. 3 companies, all failing. Credit reports showing massive debt. Bank statements revealing accounts in the red. But the insurance payouts? Those went into a separate account. An account that Sterling's creditors didn't know about. Marcus's hands trembled as he photocopied everything. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about a man in power stealing money and destroying lives to cover his tracks. But he needed more. He needed proof that Sterling had set him up specifically. Marcus remembered something from his arrest report. Detective Morrison had noted that the anonymous tip about Marcus came from a concerned citizen who saw him acting suspicious near Sterling's property. Anonymous tips were usually recorded. Marcus requested the audio from the desk clerk. What he heard changed everything. The voice on the recording was nervous, shaky, but underneath the fake accent and muffled tone, Marcus recognized something familiar. He'd heard this voice before, at the city council meeting. When Marcus had spoken about community programs, someone in the audience had shouted a response. The same vocal pattern. The same slight lisp on words with S sounds. Sterling had called in his own tip. Marcus grabbed the phone records he'd subpoenaed. The anonymous call came from a burner phone purchased with cash 3 days before the vandalism. But the purchase was made at a convenience store 6 blocks from Sterling's office. Marcus cross-referenced the timestamp with Sterling's schedule. According to his official calendar, Sterling had a meeting that ran late just 2 blocks away, exactly 30 minutes before someone bought that burner phone. The pieces fell into place like dominoes. Sterling was broke. He needed money fast. Insurance fraud was his solution, but he needed a fall guy. Marcus, the vocal young black activist who'd criticized him publicly, was the perfect target. Sterling had vandalized his own property, planted the evidence, made the anonymous call, and sat back while the system he controlled destroyed an innocent teenager. Marcus's heart pounded as he realized the full scope of what he'd uncovered. This wasn't just about proving his innocence anymore. This was about exposing corruption that went to the heart of the city's power structure. But he had to be careful. One mistake in presenting this evidence and Sterling's lawyers would tear it apart. Everything had to be perfect, unshakable, legally bulletproof. Marcus spent the rest of the night organizing his discovery into a presentation that would systematically demolish the prosecution's case while building an ironclad argument for Sterling's guilt. As the sun rose over the courthouse, Marcus Thompson sat surrounded by the evidence that would either free him or make him an even bigger target. He thought about his grandmother's words. They can't see your mind until you show them. Tomorrow, he was going to show them everything. The courtroom was standing room only when Judge Harrison called the session to order. Word had spread through social media about the kid lawyer, and people came expecting either a miracle or a public execution. Patricia Whitman strode to the podium like a gladiator entering the arena. 25 years of courtroom victories had given her the confidence of someone who'd never met a challenge she couldn't crush. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, her voice carrying the authority of absolute certainty, "what you're about to witness is a textbook case of a young man who thought he could outsmart the system." She clicked her remote, and Marcus's mugshot appeared on the large screen. 19 years old, tired eyes, wearing the expression of someone who'd just watched his future collapse. The defendant, Marcus Thompson, committed a crime of anger and entitlement. When Councilman Sterling proposed budget cuts that Mr. Thompson disagreed with, he decided to take justice into his own hands. Whitman paced in front of the jury with practiced precision. The evidence is overwhelming. His fingerprints on the weapon, a spray paint can found in his possession, security footage showing someone matching his exact description fleeing the scene, an eyewitness who saw him running from the crime. She paused for effect. And most importantly, a pattern of behavior that shows this young man has never learned to respect authority or other people's property. The jury nodded along. Everything Whitman said sounded logical, professional, convincing. "The defense," Whitman continued, glancing at Marcus with barely concealed contempt, "will try to convince you that this is all some elaborate conspiracy. That a respected city councilman somehow framed a teenager for reasons that make no sense." She clicked to her next slide, a photo of Councilman Sterling's vandalized fence. But the facts don't lie. The evidence doesn't lie. And when you look at this defendant, really look at him, ask yourself, does he look like someone who belongs in a courtroom arguing law? Or does he look like exactly what he is, a young man who made a terrible mistake and now refuses to take responsibility for it? Whitman's opening statement was flawless, professional, devastating. When she sat down, the silence in the courtroom felt like a held breath. Judge Harrison looked at Marcus with something approaching pity. "Mr. Thompson, you may present your opening statement." Marcus stood slowly. His legs felt unsteady. Every eye in the packed courtroom was on him. The jury looked skeptical at best, hostile at worst. He walked to the podium, placed his yellow legal pad down, and looked up at the jury. "My name is Marcus Thompson. 3 days ago, most of you probably never heard of me. But after today, I hope you'll remember me as the young man who helped you see that justice isn't about who looks guilty, it's about what the evidence actually proves." His voice was quiet, but it carried clearly through the silent courtroom. "Mrs. Whitman is right about one thing. This case is about someone who thought they could outsmart the system, but she's wrong about who that someone is." Marcus clicked his own remote. A financial document appeared on screen. Councilman Richard Sterling has filed 3 insurance claims in 18 months, totaling over $40,000. Each claim was for property damage. Each claim was approved without investigation. Whitman shot to her feet. "Objection! The defendant is introducing evidence that wasn't disclosed in discovery." Judge Harrison looked confused. "Mr. Thompson, Is this evidence you plan to present? Yes, Your Honor. These are public records, available to anyone who requests them. I obtained them through proper legal channels. The judge looked at Whitman. If they're public records obtained legally, I'll allow it. But Mr. Thompson, you need to establish relevance. Marcus turned back to the jury. Relevance. Ladies and gentlemen, what if I told you that Councilman Sterling is facing bankruptcy? That his businesses have failed, his personal accounts are overdrawn, and his house is in foreclosure? Murmurs rippled through the gallery. This wasn't what anyone had expected. What if I told you that the anonymous tip that led to my arrest came from a burner phone purchased 6 blocks from Mr. Sterling's office, 30 minutes after he finished a meeting in that same area? Whitman was on her feet again. Objection. Speculation and hearsay. Your Honor, Marcus replied calmly, I have phone records, purchase receipts, and time-stamped security footage. This isn't speculation. It's evidence. Judge Harrison leaned forward, suddenly very interested. You have evidence that Mr. Sterling purchased the phone used to make the anonymous tip? I have evidence that someone using a credit card registered to Sterling Enterprises purchased a burner phone at the exact time and location that would allow Mr. Sterling to make that call. Yes, sir. The courtroom erupted. Judge Harrison banged his gavel repeatedly. Order! Order in my courtroom! When silence finally returned, every person in that room was staring at Marcus with new eyes. He wasn't the confused kid they'd expected. He was a young man with evidence, arguments, and the confidence to present them. Whitman looked genuinely shaken for the first time in her career. This wasn't supposed to happen. Defendants who represented themselves were supposed to collapse under pressure, not fight back with actual legal strategy. Marcus continued, Over the next few hours, I'm going to show you that I'm not the criminal in this room. I'm just the convenient scapegoat for someone who thought a young black man from the wrong side of town would be easy to frame. He looked directly at the jury. The only question is, will you let him get away with it? The tension in the courtroom was electric as Marcus called his first witness to the stand. I call Detective Morrison to testify. Detective Morrison, a 20-year veteran with the attitude of someone who'd seen everything, walked to the witness stand with visible annoyance. He clearly hadn't expected to be questioned by the defendant himself. Marcus approached with his legal pad, but his demeanor had completely changed. Gone was the nervous teenager. In his place stood someone who moved with purpose and precision. Detective Morrison, you arrested me based on an anonymous tip, correct? That's correct. And you found a paint can in my backpack with my fingerprints on it. Morrison shifted slightly. Yes. Did you find it odd that someone committing a crime would carry the evidence with them for 3 days after the incident? Criminals aren't always smart. A few people in the gallery chuckled, but Marcus didn't react. Detective, in your 20 years of experience, how many vandalism suspects have you arrested who kept the spray paint can in their backpack for multiple days? Morrison paused. Well, it's not common. Not common? Or never? Objection, Whitman called out. Calls for speculation. I'll rephrase, Marcus said smoothly. Detective Morrison, can you name one other case where you found vandalism evidence in a suspect's possession 3 days after the alleged crime? Morrison looked uncomfortable. Not off the top of my head, no. Marcus nodded and made a note. Now, about this anonymous tip. The caller said they saw someone acting suspicious near Councilman Sterling's property at approximately 11:30 p.m., correct? That's what the report says. But the vandalism allegedly occurred at 11:47 p.m. according to the security footage. So this anonymous witness saw me acting suspicious 17 minutes before the crime actually happened? Morrison's jaw tightened. People don't always remember exact times. Or, Marcus said, his voice getting stronger, Someone called in that tip, knowing exactly when the vandalism occurred because they did it themselves. Objection. Whitman was on her feet. Speculation and arguing with the witness. Judge Harrison was leaning forward now, completely engaged. I'll allow it. Continue, Mr. Thompson. Marcus pulled out a document. Detective, I'd like you to look at Exhibit A. This is a purchase receipt from Murphy's Corner Store dated 3 days before my arrest. Someone bought a burner phone with cash at 8:47 p.m. He handed the receipt to Morrison. The same phone used to make the anonymous tip. Do you recognize the location of Murphy's Corner Store? Morrison studied the receipt. It's 6 blocks from the Sterling property. And 2 blocks from Councilman Sterling's office. Detective, did you investigate who might have purchased this phone? The purchase was made with cash. No ID required. But there are security cameras at Murphy's Corner Store, aren't there? Morrison looked trapped. Yes. Did you request that footage? A long pause. No, we didn't. The courtroom was dead silent. Marcus let the moment hang in the air. One final question, Detective. When you arrested me, did you test my hands for spray paint residue? No. Did you check my clothing for paint traces? No. Did you verify my alibi for the time of the incident? We had evidence placing you at the scene. That wasn't my question. Did you verify my alibi? Morrison's voice was barely a whisper. No. Marcus walked back to his table. No further questions. As Detective Morrison left the stand, the atmosphere in the courtroom had completely shifted. Jurors were whispering to each other. Gallery members were shaking their heads. Even the court reporter looked up from her machine with surprise. Whitman approached the bench. Your Honor, I request a brief recess to review this new evidence. Judge Harrison checked his watch. We'll break for lunch. Court will resume at 2 p.m. As the gavel banged, conversations erupted throughout the gallery. Marcus gathered his papers, trying to appear calm, but his hands were shaking slightly from adrenaline. A reporter from the local paper approached him in the hallway. Mr. Thompson, did you really uncover evidence that Councilman Sterling framed you? Marcus looked directly into the camera that had appeared beside the reporter. I uncovered evidence that someone did. The question is whether anyone in power cares enough about the truth to do something about it. As he walked away, leaving the media buzzing behind him, one thought echoed in Marcus's mind. He'd just declared war on the most powerful people in the city. There was no turning back now. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity when Judge Harrison called the afternoon session to order. Word had spread during lunch break that something extraordinary was happening. Local news crews lined the back wall. The gallery buzzed with anticipation. Marcus stood to address the court, but before he could speak, Patricia Whitman rose with the desperation of someone watching 25 years of victories crumble. Your Honor, I object to this entire proceeding. The defendant is turning this courtroom into a circus with wild conspiracy theories and character assassination. She pointed at Marcus with barely controlled fury. This boy is trying to destroy the reputation of a respected public servant based on coincidences and speculation. Councilman Sterling is the victim here, not the perpetrator. Judge Harrison looked at Marcus. Mr. Thompson, I hope you have more than circumstantial evidence to support these serious allegations. Marcus walked to his table and picked up a thick folder. Your Honor, I'd like to call Councilman Richard Sterling to the stand. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Sterling, sitting in the front row looking increasingly pale, shot to his feet. This is outrageous! I'm the victim of this crime. Mr. Sterling, Judge Harrison said firmly, you're not required to testify, but if Mr. Thompson has properly subpoenaed you as a witness, you may be compelled to appear. Marcus held up an official document. I served the subpoena this morning, Your Honor. Sterling's lawyer whispered urgently in his ear, but Sterling shook him off. His face was red with indignation. I have nothing to hide. If this punk wants to embarrass himself further, let him try. Sterling took the stand with the arrogance of someone who'd never been seriously challenged. He adjusted his expensive tie and glared at Marcus. Marcus approached slowly, carrying his folder like a weapon. Mr. Jim, Sterling, you filed an insurance claim for this vandalism incident totaling $8,400, correct? The damage was extensive. For spray paint on a fence and slashed tires? Quality repairs are expensive. Marcus opened his folder and pulled out photographs. These are photos of your fence taken by the insurance adjuster. The spray paint covers approximately 12 square feet. According to 3 local contractors I contacted, professional cleaning and repainting would cost no more than $400. Sterling shifted in his seat. You get what you pay for. Or, Marcus said, his voice getting stronger, you inflate the claim to maximize the payout. Objection, Whitman called. Argumentative. Sustained, Judge Harrison said, but his eyes never left Sterling. Marcus continued. Mr. Sterling, where were you between 11:30 and midnight on the night of the vandalism? At home? Asleep? Alone? Sterling hesitated just a fraction too long. My wife was visiting her sister in Chicago. So no one can verify your whereabouts? I don't need anyone to verify anything. I'm the victim. Marcus pulled out another document. This is your cell phone record for that evening. It shows a call made at 11:52 p.m. to Murphy's Corner store. Sterling's face went white. That's impossible. The call lasted 37 seconds, long enough to ask if they sell burner phones, long enough to find out they close at midnight, long enough to realize you needed to buy one before they closed. I never made that call. Marcus walked to the evidence table and picked up a small device. This is the burner phone used to make the anonymous tip. I had it analyzed by a private forensics expert. He held it up for the jury to see. The phone contains trace amounts of a very expensive hand cream. The same brand you use, Mr. Sterling. The same brand found in your office and your car. Sterling was sweating now. Hundreds of people use that cream. But not hundreds of people had motive to frame me. Not hundreds of people desperately needed insurance money. Not hundreds of people knew exactly where I lived and what kind of backpack I carried. Marcus's voice rose with each accusation. You vandalized your own property. You planted evidence in my backpack when I left it unattended at the community center where I volunteer. You made the anonymous call. And you sat back and watched while the system you control tried to destroy an innocent teenager. That's insane! Sterling shouted. Why would I risk everything to frame some nobody kid? The moment the words left Sterling's mouth, he knew he'd made a fatal mistake. Marcus turned to the jury with fire in his eyes. Some nobody kid. There it is. The truth he's been trying to hide. To Councilman Sterling, I'm not a person. I'm not a citizen. I'm nobody. Just another black boy whose life doesn't matter enough to worry about destroying. The courtroom was dead silent. But here's what Mr. Sterling didn't count on, Marcus continued, his voice now commanding every ear in the room. This nobody kid spent 3 years studying law. This nobody kid knows how to investigate. This nobody kid refuses to be another casualty of a corrupt system. He walked directly in front of the jury box. And this nobody kid is about to prove that justice doesn't care about your bank account, your title, or the color of your skin. Justice only cares about the truth. Sterling sat defeated in the witness chair, his empire of lies collapsing around him. Marcus had shown them his mind. Now they couldn't unsee it. The courtroom held at his breath as Judge Harrison reviewed Marcus's evidence one final time. Sterling sat slumped in the witness chair, his expensive suit wrinkled, his face ashen. The man who'd walked in as a respected councilman now looked like exactly what he was, a criminal caught in his own trap. Patricia Whitman made one last desperate attempt to salvage her case. Your Honor, even if we accept the defendant's theories about Mr. Sterling's financial motives, the evidence against Mr. Thompson remains unchanged. His fingerprints are still on that paint can. Marcus stood without waiting to be recognized. Your Honor, I'd like to demonstrate exactly how those fingerprints got there. He walked to the evidence table and picked up the spray paint can, holding it carefully with a tissue. 3 weeks ago, I volunteered at a community cleanup day organized by Councilman Sterling's office. We painted over graffiti in the neighborhood. Mr. Sterling personally handed me several paint cans, including this one. Marcus pulled out photographs from the cleanup day. These photos, taken by the city's PR department, show me handling multiple paint cans under Mr. Sterling's direct supervision. He made sure my fingerprints would be on this exact can weeks before he used it to frame me. The jury stared at the photos with dawning understanding. Sterling's elaborate plan was falling apart piece by piece. Judge Harrison leaned forward. Mr. Sterling, do you wish to respond to this allegation? Sterling's lawyer grabbed his arm, but Sterling shook him off. Pride and desperation made him reckless. So what if I gave him paint cans? That doesn't prove anything. Actually, Mr. Sterling, it proves everything. Marcus walked to his table and picked up one final document. This is a purchase order from your office dated 4 weeks ago. You ordered 12 cans of spray paint for the community cleanup, but you only distributed 11. The 12th can, this can, you kept for your insurance fraud scheme. The evidence was overwhelming, incontrovertible, beautiful in its completeness. Judge Harrison didn't even need to hear closing arguments. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, given the evidence presented, I'm prepared to direct a verdict. But first, Mr. Sterling, I strongly advise you to consult with your attorney about the serious criminal charges you're now facing. Sterling finally broke. I didn't mean for it to go this far, he shouted, tears streaming down his face. I just needed the money. I was going to lose everything. His lawyer physically pulled him from the witness stand, but the damage was done. His confession echoed through the packed courtroom. Judge Harrison banged his gavel. Mr. Thompson, on all charges, this court finds you not guilty. You are free to go. The explosion of sound that followed was unlike anything that courthouse had ever heard. The gallery erupted in cheers. Jurors smiled and shook their heads in amazement. Even the court reporter stopped typing to applaud. Marcus stood perfectly still for a moment, letting the reality wash over him. 3 months of nightmares were over. His future was restored. Justice had won. But the most important moment came when Patricia Whitman approached his table. For 25 years, she'd never lost a case. For 25 years, she'd believed the system was infallible. Now she stood before a 19-year-old who'd proven her wrong about everything. Mr. Thompson, she said quietly, extending her hand. I owe you an apology, and I owe you respect. Marcus shook her hand. Mrs. Whitman, you don't owe me anything. But maybe the next time a young person stands in your courtroom, you'll remember that intelligence doesn't have a color, and justice doesn't have a price tag. She nodded, humbled in a way she'd never experienced. As Marcus gathered his papers, his phone buzzed with a text from Harvard Law School. We have reviewed the resolution of your case. Your admission and full scholarship are hereby reinstated. We look forward to welcoming you to our fall class. But the sweetest moment came when his grandmother appeared in the gallery, oxygen tank beside her, tears of pride streaming down her weathered face. Marcus pushed through the crowd and embraced her. I showed them, Grandma. I showed them my mind. She held him tight. Baby, you showed them more than that. You showed them their future. Every young person who looks like you now knows they can fight back and win. As they walked out of that courthouse together, Marcus Thompson was no longer the scared teenager who'd been arrested 3 months ago. He was a young man who'd stared down the system and won. He was a lawyer. 6 months later, Marcus Thompson stood at the podium of Harvard Law School's orientation ceremony. The same young man who'd been laughed at in a courtroom now addressed 300 incoming law students as their keynote speaker. "When I walked into that courtroom," he began, his voice carrying the confidence earned through fire, "everyone saw what they expected to see. A young black man who didn't belong. Someone who should take whatever scraps the system offered and be grateful." He paused, looking out at faces of every color, every background, every dream imaginable. "But here's what I learned. Your mind is the most powerful weapon you'll ever carry, and the moment you show them what you're truly capable of, everything changes." The applause was thunderous, but Marcus wasn't finished. Councilman Sterling was sentenced to 5 years for insurance fraud and perjury. Detective Morrison was demoted for failing to properly investigate, and the city implemented new oversight procedures to prevent future corruption. He smiled, thinking of his grandmother watching from the front row. But the real victory wasn't in that courtroom. It was in every young person who saw that you don't have to accept what others think you deserve. You have the power to demand what you've earned. Marcus opened his law office 3 months later. Thompson Legal Aid, Justice for All, occupied a small storefront in the neighborhood where he grew up. His first client was a teenager named David, wrongfully accused of theft. His second was Maria, a single mother fighting an unfair eviction. Each case was different, but the principle remained the same. Everyone deserves a fighter in their corner. Today, Marcus Thompson is one of the youngest attorneys ever to argue before the state Supreme Court. He's won dozens of cases for people the system forgot. He's proven that competence has no color, intelligence has no price tag, and justice belongs to anyone brave enough to demand it. But most importantly, he's shown that when they underestimate you, that's not your weakness, that's your power. So here's my question for you. What hidden strength are you not showing the world? What injustice are you accepting that you have the power to fight? Your moment is coming. The question is, will you be ready to show them your mind? If this story inspired you, share it with someone who needs to remember their own power. Like this video if you believe that intelligence and courage can change everything. And subscribe for more stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things, because your story could be next.
The story you heard today wasn't cleaned up. It was told exactly as it happened. At Black Voices Uncut, we believe that's the only way truth can live. If you felt something, hit like, comment, and your reaction, and subscribe. Every week, we bring you voices that refuse to be silenced.